The complete works of Swami Vivekananda, Jnana Yoga, Chapter 6, The Absolute and the Manifestation, Part 2. The whole of this universe, therefore, is, as it were, a peculiar form. The Absolute is that ocean which you and I and the sun and stars and everything else are various waves of that ocean. And what makes the waves different? Only the form. And that form is time, space, and causation, all entirely dependent on the wave. As soon as the wave goes, they vanish. As soon as the individual gives up this Maya, it vanishes for him and he becomes free. The whole struggle is to get rid of this clinging on to time, space, and causation, which are always obstacles in our way. What is the theory of evolution? What are the two factors? A tremendous potential power which is trying to express itself, and circumstances which are holding it down, the environments not allowing it to express itself. So in order to fight with these environments, the power is talking. Power is taking new bodies again and again. An amoeba in the struggle gets another body and conquers some obstacles, then gets another body, and so on until it becomes a man. Now, if you carry this idea to its logical conclusion, there must come a time when that power that was in the amoeba can bring before it and will thus escape from all its environments. This idea expressed in metaphysics will take this form. There are two components in every action. The one, the subject, and the other, the object. And the one aim of life is to make the subject master of the object. For instance, I feel unhappy because a man scolds me. My struggle will be to make myself strong enough to conquer the environment, so that he may scold and I shall not feel. That is how we are all trying to conquer. What is meant by morality? Making the subject strong by attuning it to the absolute, so that finite nature ceases to have control over us. It is a logical conclusion of our philosophy that there must come a time when we shall have conquered all the environments, because nature is finite. Here is another thing to learn. How do you know that nature is finite? You can only know this through metaphysics. Nature is that infinite under limitations. Therefore, it is finite. So there must come a time when we shall have conquered all the environments. And how are we to conquer them? We cannot possibly conquer all the objective environments. We cannot. The little fish wants to fly from its enemies in the water. How does it do so? By evolving wings and becoming a bird. The fish did not change the water or the air. The change was in itself. Change is always subjective. All through evolution, you will find that the conquest of nature comes by change in the subject. Apply this to religion and morality, and you will find that the conquest of evil comes by the change in the subject alone. That is how the Advaita system gets its whole force, on the subjective side of man. To talk of evil and misery is nonsense, because they do not exist outside. If I am immune against all anger, I never feel angry. If I am proof against all hatred, I never feel hatred. This is therefore the process by which to achieve that conquest, through the subjective, by perfecting the subjective. I make bold to say that the only religion which agrees with and even goes a little further than modern researches, both on physical and moral lines, is the Advaita. And that is why it appeals to modern scientists so much. They find that the old dualistic theories are not enough for them, do not satisfy their necessities. A man must not only have faith, but intellectual faith too. Now, in this latter part of the 19th century, such an idea as that religion coming from any other source than one's own hereditary religion must be false shows that there is still weakness left and such ideas must be given up. I do not mean that such is the case in this country alone. It is in every country and nowhere more than in my own. This Advaita was never allowed to come to people. At first, some monks got hold of it and took it to the forests. And so it came to be called the forest philosophy. By the mercy of the Lord, the Buddha came and preached it to the masses, and the whole nation became Buddhist. Long after that, when atheists and agnostics had destroyed the nation again, it was found out that Advaita was the only way out to save India from materialism. Thus has Advaita twice saved India from materialism. Before the Buddha came, materialism had spread to a fearful extent, and it was of a most hideous kind, not like that of the present day, but of a far worse nature. I am a materialist in a certain sense, because I believe that there is only one. That is what the materialist wants you to believe. Only he calls it matter, and I call it God. The materialists admit that out of this matter all hope and religion and everything have come. I say all these have come out of Brahman. But that materialism that prevailed before Buddha was that crude sort of materialism which taught eat, drink and be merry. There is no God, soul or heaven. Religion is a concoction of wicked priests. It taught the morality that as long as you live, you must try to live happily, eat, though you have to borrow money for the food, and never mind about repaying it. That was the old materialism. And that kind of philosophy spread so much that even today it has got the name of popular philosophy. Buddha brought the Vedanta to light, gave it to the people, and saved India. 1,000 years after his death, a similar state of things again prevailed. The mobs, the masses, and various races had been converted to Buddhism. Naturally, the teachings of the Buddha became in time degenerated because most of the people were very ignorant. Buddhism taught no God, no ruler of the universe. So gradually the masses brought their gods and devils and hobgoblins out again, and a tremendous hodgepodge was made of Buddhism in India. Again materialism came to the fore, taking the form of license with the higher classes and superstition with the lower. Then Shankaracharya arose and once more revived the Vedanta philosophy. He made it a rationalistic philosophy. In the Upanishads, the arguments are often very obscure. But Buddha, the moral side of the philosophy, was laid stress upon, and by Shankaracharya, the intellectual side. He worked out, rationalized, and placed before men the wonderful, coherent system of Advaita. Materialism prevails in Europe today. You may pray for the salvation of modern skeptics, but they do not yield, they want reason. The salvation of Europe depends upon a rationalistic religion, and Advaita, the non-duality, the oneness, The idea of an impersonal God is the only religion that can have any hold on any intellectual people. It comes whenever religion seems to disappear and irreligion seems to prevail, and that is why it has taken ground in Europe and America. I would say one thing more in connection with this philosophy. In the old Upanishads, we find sublime poetry. Their authors were poets. Plato says, inspiration comes to people through poetry, and it seems as if these ancient rishis, seers of truth, were raised above humanity to show these truths through poetry. They never preached, never philosophized, nor wrote. Music came out of their hearts. In Buddha, we had the great universal heart and infinite patience, making religion practical and bringing it to everyone's door. In Shankaracharya, we saw tremendous intellectual power, throwing the scorching light of reason upon everything. We want today that bright sun of intellectuality joined with the heart of Buddha, the wonderful infinite heart of love and mercy. This union will give us the highest philosophy. Science and religion will meet and shake hands. Poetry and philosophy will become friends. This will be the religion of the future. And if we can work it out, we may be sure that it will be for all times and for all peoples. This is the one way that will prove acceptable to modern science, for it has almost come to it. When the scientific teacher asserts that all things are the manifestation of one force, does it not remind you of the God of whom you hear in the Upanishads? As the one fire entering into the universe expresses itself in various forms, even so that one soul is expressing itself in every soul, and yet is infinitely more besides. Do you not see whither science is tending? The Hindu nation proceeded through the study of the mind, through metaphysics and logic. The European nations start from external nature, and now they too are coming to the same results. We find that searching through the mind, we at last come to that oneness, that universal oneness, the internal soul of everything, the essence and reality of everything, the ever free, the ever blissful, the ever existing. Through material science, we have come to the same oneness. Science today is telling us that all things are but the manifestation of one energy, which is the sum total of everything which exists. And the trend of humanity is towards freedom and not towards bondage. Why should men be moral? Because through morality is the path towards freedom, and immorality leads to bondage. Another peculiarity of the Advaita system is that from its very start it is non-destructive. This is another glory, the boldness to preach. Do not disturb the faith of any, even of those who through their ignorance have attached themselves to lower forms of worship. That is what it says. Do not disturb, but help everyone to get higher and higher. Include all humanity. This philosophy preaches a God who is a sum total. If you seek a universal religion which can apply to everyone, that religion must not be composed of only the parts, but it must always be the sum total and include all degrees of religious deployment. The idea is not clearly found in any other religious system. They are all parts of equally struggling to attain to the whole. The existence of the part is only for this. So from the very first, Advaita has no antagonism with various sects existing in India. There are dualists existing today, and their number is by far the largest in India because dualism naturally appeals to the less educated souls. It is the dualists existing today, and their number is by far largest in India. It is a very dualist. Advaita has no quarrel. The one thinks that God is outside the universe, somewhere in heaven, and the other that he is in one's own soul, and that it will be a blasphemy to call him anything more distant. Any idea of separation would be terrible. He is the nearest of the near. There is no word in any language to express this nearness except the word oneness. With any other idea, the Advaitist is not satisfied, just as the dualist is shocked with the concept of the Advaita and thinks it is blasphemous. At the same time, the Advaitist knows that other ideas must be, and so has no quarrel with the dualist, who is on the right road. From his standpoint, the dualist will have to see many. It is a constitutional necessity of his standpoint. Let him have it. The Advaitist knows that whatever may be his theories, he is going to the same goal as he himself. There he differs entirely from the dualist, who is forced by his point of view to believing that all differing views are wrong. The dualists all over the world naturally believe in a personal God who is purely anthropomorphic, who, like a great potentate in this world, is pleased with some and displeased with others. He is arbitrarily pleased with some people or races and showers blessings upon them. Naturally, the dualist comes to the conclusion that God has favorites and he hopes to be one of them. You will find that in almost every religion is the idea we are the favorites of our God, and only by believing as we do can you be taken into favor with him. Some dualists are so narrow as to insist that only the few that have been predestined to the favor of the God can be saved. The rest may try ever so hard, but they cannot be accepted. I challenge you to show me one dualistic religion which has not more or less of this exclusiveness. And therefore, in the nature of things, dualistic religions are bound to fight and quarrel with one another. And this they have been ever doing. Again, these dualists win the popular favor by appealing to the vanity of the uneducated. They like to feel that they enjoy exclusive privileges. The dualist thinks that you cannot be moral until you have a God with a rod in his hand ready to punish you. The unthinking masses are generally dualists, and they, poor fellows, have been persecuted for thousands of years in every country. And their idea of salvation is, therefore, freedom from the fear of punishment. I was asked by a clergyman in America, "What? You have no devil in your religion? How can that be?" But we find that the best and the greatest men that have been born in this world have worked with that high impersonal idea. It is the man who said, "I and my Father are one," whose power has descended unto millions. For thousands of years it has worked for good. And we know that the same man, because he was a non-dualist, was merciful to others. To the masses who could not conceive of anything higher than a personal God, he said, "Pray to your Father in heaven." To others who could grasp a higher idea, he said, "I am the vine, ye are the branches." And to his disciples, to whom he had revealed himself more fully, he proclaimed the truth, the highest truth: "I and my Father are one." It was a great Buddha who never cared for the dualist gods and who has been called an atheist and materialist, who yet was ready to give up his body for a poor goat. That man set in motion the highest moral ideals any nation can have. Whenever there is a moral code, it is a ray of light from that man. We cannot force the great hearts of the world into narrow limits and keep them there, especially at this time in the history of humanity, when there is a degree of intellectual development such as was never dreamt of even 100 years ago, when a wave of scientific knowledge has arisen which nobody even 50 years ago would have dreamt of. By trying to force people into narrow limits, you degrade them into animals and unthinking masses. You kill their moral life. What is now wanted is a combination of the greatest heart with the highest intellectuality, of infinite love with infinite knowledge. The Vedantist gives no other attributes to God except these three: that He is infinite existence, He is infinite knowledge, and He is infinite bliss, as He regards these three as one. Existence without knowledge and love cannot be. Knowledge without love and love without knowledge cannot be. What we want is the harmony of existence, knowledge, and bliss, infinite. For that is our goal. We want harmony, not one-sided development. And it is possible to have the intellect of a Shankaracharya with the heart of a Buddha. I hope we shall all struggle to attain to that blessed combination.